I wanted to chat. Okay, good. How's everybody doing? Ça va?
Doing well, oui, ça va.
Okay.
All good.
Well, that's great to see you. I have an exciting case study today. Some of you might know it or not. I'm going to talk about a new paradigm for how we build and how we run organizations called the Teal model of organizations. And this model is coming from it's from a book called Reinventing Organizations. This is the book. It's a very meaty and I found it powerful, very powerful book, published in 2014 by someone that we're going to hear about today called Frédéric Laloux. And this book also has been published. I mean, he's been translated in many different languages. As of about a year ago, there's been about 650,000 copies of this book released. And there is also a summarized version of the book with illustrations. Wonderful book here. Both of them are very complementary. We're going to talk about this today, so very excited to be here. It's going to be an attempt at talking about this model because this model is so big, so transformational that it's very intimidating to comment on it. It's a model that has a lot of people, I would say, it's supported by many people. There's a big network, international network now of practitioners, enthusiasts, professionals, people interested in this model. There are also critics of this model, so that's really interesting. But what motivated me, why did I have this example on my list of strategic narratives to look at is because in the previous sessions, I've talked mostly about companies and brands, and these are private entities. I mean, some of them are public too, but they are for-profit, private public entities. This one is different. It's a movement. We're really talking about a movement here, about a network of people started by one person, but now it's at an international global scale. And I wanted to see if my theory around strategic narrative applies, and it's still, the test came out positive. Now you will see it's not perfect. Frankly, I could continue to study this for years. I think there's so many layers to it, so it might not be very fair. I might not do justice to this movement. I may cut corner or do shortcuts or misinterpret what this movement is about. Forgive me if you're here in this call, if you're watching this video, please forgive me. My intent is just an experiment here. It's just we're just doing a test. We're just diving into something, and maybe you didn't know about reinventing organizations and Teal organizations, and maybe you'll learn about it and be interested to apply this model for yourself, or at least look at it. So who here on this call, show me, show of hand, who knew about this book and Teal organizations? Anyone? Maybe a little bit. Yeah, okay. One or two people, but yeah, it's still to be discovered. I learned about it from a friend who took this model and applied it to his own business. He has a business of about 30 people, I would say. And he started implementing it a couple of years ago, somewhat successfully. He's done some great learning with it, and he told me about it. And then I started researching. So the first thing I did was read the book. And there are so many resources. So without further ado, let's jump in and see where this leads us. See where this takes us, I would say. Okay, so there we go. All right. Sharing my screen with you. It's coming up. There you go. So Teal organizations today in the strategic narrative underground session. I will. Okay, hang on, just this. I always have this problem, guys, with my Zoom here. I should do something about that. Bear with me for a second. There. Now I can see you and see my slides. Always hides it. Okay, very cool. I continue to refine the way I explain my own stuff, my own definition of strategic narrative. So I'm just gonna. I know you, for some of you, you were probably last week on this call, and you will have heard this before. But just so that we're all on the same page, here is what I mean by a strategic narrative. Differentiate from a story because, in my opinion, and in the dictionary's opinion as well, stories are events that happen in the past at a high level. Narratives promote a particular point of view that is future-oriented, open-ended, and turn your audience into participants. Right before this talk today, I was on a call with a client over in Europe who this summer had a retreat with his team, about 30, 40 people team, and who said, look, Guillaume, you had told me that this new way of thinking about narrative creates a movement. I saw it in front of me with my team when they were so engaged and so propelled with our business idea here. It's something I never saw before. And he's been in business for 15 years. So it was a living example of what we mean by narrative. We focus on this word, this very, very specific word. We make a difference between story and narrative. These are two different concepts. Now, I consider a narrative being a system of stories that you build intentionally to mobilize people to participate in a new opportunity. So when we think about a system, that means we've got discrete elements, they are tied together, and if we can explain it, understand it, it means we can also build it, we can correct it, we can shape it. Here are the 4 stories. That's the model I will use to analyze the Teal model of organizations today. And lately, I've been thinking about, okay, how do we use this? Because this is nice. This is good theory, right? Okay, this is interesting theory. What do we actually do with this? And there are really 2 phases. The first one is a construction phase, and during which you're going to look at those 4 stories and break down your initiative, your business, whatever it might be, a project, an organization, say. And you're going to construct there's a little typo here. Here, that's better. You're going to construct first your narrative around those 4 stories. That's what you're going to get, is that the foundational pillar of those 4 stories. And then there is obviously an activation phase, which means that you're going to take this narrative and bring it everywhere around your company, your organization. Most people think, when they hear the word strategic narrative, they think about this little guy right here. Oh, it's marketing. Yes, it's communication. Maybe it's my sales pitch, it's what I say outside. This is a very, very limited view of this concept. As you could see, this is just the tip of the iceberg. A narrative is a modus operandi to run your entire company. It also shows inside, not only outside, but also inside your organization. It's about your values, your culture, your ways of working, but also individually, as a business leader, how you show up, how you're excited yourself about what you're putting forth. So we're going to see that in the example of the Teal movement, because it's very, very distinctive here. This is a very good illustrative example, of how the internal facet of a narrative shows up and what it can do. In fact, we're going to see that it's kind of the opposite of what we see most of the time. Most of the time, we see big narratives with big external outside facets of it. When the external is overdeveloped, I think someone in the call last week made the comment, is that we see a disconnect between outside and internal, and as a result, people get disengaged, they get cynical, they get demotivated. They don't believe they have no meaning in what they do at work. I promised I wouldn't do anything promotional with these calls, but still I'm getting the question, where can I read? Where can I find out more about it? So 30 seconds commercial, sign up to my daily email list if you're not on it. And I have a workshop starting September 14th. That's it. Keep it short. Okay. So far, this is Strategic Narrative Underground session number 18. I started back in May, and I decided to shift gear a little bit over the summer and focus more on case studies. And in the last 4 episodes of this series, we went over Volvo cars. So I developed, I looked at the Volvo car example. A wonderful company called Archimoto here out of on the west coast of the United States called Archimoto. They do this fabulous vehicle here, electrical vehicle. We talked about Mod Pizza, and last week we talked about Netflix in 2004. That's where we are previously on the Meta Strategic Narrative Underground sessions. And today, finally, without further ado, Teal organizations. I don't have a video. I don't have any interactive media here. The research I've done started about in January. I read this book. I attended the Global Teal Conference in March. I've read many articles. You can also watch the conferences of Frédéric Laloux. They are translated in 3 languages. He can speak in French. He can speak in Dutch, I think, German, also 4 languages, and also in English. Let's start with the origin story. How did this all started? So this is Frédéric Laloux, and there's a wonderful podcast and interview. It's in French, but I'll just do a summary in English for you, where the host asks Frédéric, so who are you? And he starts by saying, I don't like to say who I am, because that question seems like I have only one rigid, formal, fixed identity. I could tell you I am an author. I could tell you I'm a speaker. I'm a former consultant. All of these are true, but I hate being called with a label. In fact, if you go to my LinkedIn profile, it says I'm just living the life I'm supposed to live. And that tells you everything from the get-go about this idea of Teal organizations. He doesn't see organizations the same way we seem to all see them. So his narrative shows up the second you ask him who he is, which is fascinating. Because his origin story is right there in any interviews, any appearances he's going to have, with anyone. What we're finding out in this interview is that in 2011, everything seemed to go very well for him. He had a very happy life with a beautiful family. He had a stable job as a management consultant, helping companies, chemical companies, pharmaceutical companies, hospital. I mean, very diverse set of companies, and attending those and helping those business leaders around their companies. And one day he started noticing the strong feeling of sadness in him. Feels very sad. He describes it as not just mental, emotional, but also physical. And he couldn't work with large corporations anymore. And in doing some self-reflection, he realized that the way we build and run companies has reached its limits. There's too much frustration, disengagements. It's a very costly way to run companies during times when also the level of complexity around us is increasing. Increasing level of complexity. Organizations have to be very nimble. And still, we approach how we build companies in a very traditional, very archaic way. So he decides to stop his job as a consultant and use his savings to fund a research project. And over the following 2 years, he reflects and he goes after evidences that there could be a new way to think about organizations in general. he ends up writing this book 3 years later, publishes it, over 650,000 copies sold by now. And in this book, he tells the stories, in fact, of 12 companies. So at first, he starts by researching, he says 40 or 50 companies, and he narrows down the set to 12 and realizes that what's fascinating to him is that although these companies are from completely different industries, completely different geographical location in the world, different sizes, they started at different times in the history, they seem to all come up with the same conclusion, the same model. And it looks like an emerging trend, a new way to build organizations that are not only more sustainable, who have a less negative impact on their community, on the environment, but also organizations who have far better results. So that's what the book is about. And that's how he comes across this idea. He's just you know, he's a consultant, and now then decides one day that this is it. What I find interesting in this origin story is that Lalou did not invent the concept, that the patterns that he's observing. He names them teal, but even the color teal is borrowed from another domain, a more philosophical domain. And what he does is that he just observes, and he just wants to show the truth. Like we've come to a limit about how organizations work. And he's just telling the evolution of how we've built organizations. And when he does it, he does this with such honesty and transparency and courage to recognize that, you know, he's maybe one of the culprits of for repeating again and again this pattern of types of model of organization that don't seem to work anymore. Clearly, he follows his heart, his passion. He follows the voice inside him, and his vocation changes as a result. And he does something about the status quo. He self-funds a research project. So the origin story here is really powerful, is fundamental, because he didn't know. I mean, he thought about a couple projects, said, "Oh, I think I'm going to write a book about this," but he was far from guessing the impact that this book would have at some point. The opportunity story is about the possibility to create completely different types of organizations based on an approach that is really new, different. This is very uncommon. It is not very intuitive for us. The opportunity is clearly beyond just him. It's for all of us. And it's not powered by a consulting firm, or that is expecting immediate return and profit out of this. In fact, if you go to his website, he has a set of 150 videos that he recorded that are free. And his way to fund this opportunity, this movement here, is based on what I think he calls it the generosity economy, or the give what you can business model. You can pitch in, you can give some money, and if you feel like it's helpful, that's how he funds his the development of his method. So what's really distinctive here, one pattern that I observe in good strategic narratives, is a high level of detachment. This is for sure a proprietary methodology, is probably protected by copyright, but he makes it as accessible, as available as possible. That reminds me of a previous strategic narrative we explored several calls ago. It reminds me of the example of Volvo. When Volvo released the 3-point seatbelt in 1959, they patented it. But they use a patent that is free for everyone to use. Anyone can take that patent and replicate it, no cost, no royalty, zero, nothing, which is indicative of risk-taking, detachment, but also some kind of determination to have to create an opportunity that is not an opportunity to grow a better business or be all about the company, but an opportunity for everyone to share. And the idea is that indirectly the profit we're going to make are going to come across or come around at some point, but it's not the primary intent here. So there is really this idea of detachment. So detachment is one of the patterns I have identified. I'm still working on how to express that, but I see it here very, very strongly in the Teal model. How does he do that? He studies those 12 companies, and here's my summary, the way I would paraphrase the opportunity story. Together, we can build more performing, more resilient, and less destructive organizations. And he shows us, he uses 12 examples. Some of them are, before I read the book, I didn't know some of those companies, but some companies I did, like Patagonia. Patagonia is, especially here on the West Coast, if you're about outdoors, it's a very well-known brand. Patagonia has been working pretty much from the get-go based on the model, on the Teal organization model. And one of the pillars, we're going to see that in a second, being no traditional hierarchical structure. There is a hierarchy, but not in the traditional sense of things. Another example that struck me when I read the book was the example of Morningstar. It's a food processing company that provides about, based on the research, a number anywhere between 50 to 60% of tomato products in the North America market. So if you had tomato sauce, pizza, or something with tomato, you probably had some of their products. And they run based on those principles as well. What are those principles? What is the perspective story? Okay, so that's the very meaty part, and that's where I think it's going to be difficult to walk you through those big ideas in just a matter of minutes. Highly recommend that you read the book. So let me try it. Okay, the first thing is this. There is a metaphor and symbol change. We typically tend to think about organizations as machines, right? And in our daily vernacular, you can hear it. We're organized with silos, with departments, with components. We run effectively. The processes have to be optimized. Things have to be planned. It's really very mechanical. In the Teal model, the organization is now thought just like a tree, much more organic, much more driven by life within it, and able to self-adapt based on the internal or external conditions. So it's a new management paradigm, a new way to envision collaboration, new way to structure organizations, new way to function. It is really mind-boggling to think that so there is an organization I came across in March at the Teal international gathering. Roche, Roche, the big pharmaceutical company based in Europe, doesn't do budget anymore. They just don't do budgeting anymore. What? No budget for a company of several dozens of thousands of people? Correct. The CEO is very proud of it. It's a very scary change, but this organization has always known that the processes and the energy involved in budgeting was actually bigger and more costly than if they didn't have any budget. And they're proving it now. One of the idea of the Teal model is that finance, money is just what the company needs. It's the resources, but it flows based on the need of the company. So there is no control. There's no command and control the way we used to think about it in the traditional model. So in terms of the narrative here, what are we seeing? We are seeing a very effective use of symbols, tree versus machines. Everybody knows what a tree or a machine is, right? There's a very good, clear contrast. So if you're thinking about your own strategic narrative, what is the symbol that represents your philosophy, your perspective. Maybe you can come up with a logo or something visual that everybody understands, something you could almost print on a t-shirt. That symbol, that paradigm goes in contradiction to something that used to happen before, that used to be before, right? There's an evolution. And that is a very important basis, very foundational premise for differentiation on the market, for instance. All right, I'm going to try to go a little faster here because we're almost at the half-hour mark. The other thing that I see is that the Teal model here, so this is how Lalou explains it very beautifully in his book. The Teal model is an evolution of how we used to think about organizations. 100,000 years ago, we were just small ethnic groups where organization looked like a group of people run by elderly, more authoritative people. And then we moved into chiefdoms, right? The Middle Age. That's still how mobs, mafias run. It's like whoever is the strongest or has the loudest voice or the biggest gun runs the group. And as we start to be more developed and want to scale our ability to survive on this planet, we start thinking about hierarchy where command and control and the stick, the carrot and the stick is the way we think about organizations. And then as maybe we start thinking, after World War II about more effective ways to even go one step further. And we think about organizations still, in terms of predicting control, but where the things can be more easily replicable, and that's when the orange stage is really the where we think about the organizations as a machine. Then there is a more recent way to think about organizations, which is we think about organizations more as families, right? Where stakeholders have all a say, and where harmony is really the number one criteria for success for the organization. And the Teal model is an evolution of those models. It's a new way to look at organizations in terms of self-management. So there are three major pillars for Teal organizations: self-management, no traditional hierarchy, the way we think about this. So there is still a CEO, but the role of the CEO is completely different. The role of the CEO is not to send orders that trickle down, that dictate all of your behaviors and your decisions. The role of the CEO is to orchestrate a series of much smaller hierarchies that are able to self-regulate, self-adapt based on a common goal still. Wholeness, people can truly be themselves at work and focus on their contribution and their growth. So which means that meetings are run completely differently. Innovations run completely differently. Organizations is totally different. And then an evolutionary purpose, which is more of it's a trickier concept to explain and to get, but energy is unlocked when personal and organizational purposes are aligned. I'll keep it at that because it's a much bigger concept here. One of the patterns that I see in the strategic narrative is evolution. And I talked about this pattern before, but creating a narrative is being future oriented, inviting people to new opportunities, inviting them to something more innovative. It's visually depicted here. It's very, very, very clear. So if you're doing marketing, software, if you're producing food or different kind of clothing, whatever the industry you are, could you have a visual like that where you say, this is where we are, this is how different we are, this is how different we think. And we come from a lineage of former approaches, historical approaches, in our industry that have kind of reached their limit. And this is the new way we think about it. So this is a very powerful pattern here that I encourage you to consider. Finally, the product story. What is the product, right? It's all good theory. It's all great big ideas and wonderful origin story. Well, now what do we do concretely? Lalou put out a book together. Quickly, this book got translated, turned into an ebook. He did a video series and talks. So I will give him credit for the first four at a high level, right? For my four first point here. The rest of those products those vehicles that help you get to the idea of Teal organization. All of those products were created by other people, not him, but people, believers in this new model. I came across diagnostic tools, actionable, there is a set of actionable practices. There is a wiki. You can go on reinventingorganizations.wiki.org, I think, and find a full list of detailed, very well documented list of practices you should consider if you want to turn your organization into a Teal organization. There are global conferences. There is a network, there you go, of practitioners. There are support groups. And of course, because it's a movement, there are also critics, right? Not everybody think it's a good idea. Not everybody thinks it's going to work. Not everybody thinks it's going to be successful and that it's healthy, that we should stay with the traditional machine, like a metaphor for the machine metaphor for organizations. When you run into this last point here, it means you've created something innovative. It means you have a strategic narrative, in fact. Right? To summarize, here's the Teal narrative. Our origin story, the way we build and run our companies has reached its limit. So together, the opportunity, together we can build more performing, more resilient and less destructive organizations. How do we do this? The perspective is the Teal model of revolutionary organizations. And how do you activate it? Well, there's a system of tools and practices to activate the Teal paradigm. Well, with that in mind, this was probably a longer call than usual, a slightly longer call than usual. I mean, this model has so many layers. And again, I just flew by those 3 pillars, but trust me, there is so much more to say about this, so much more. I just, I probably scratched point something % of the surface of this big thing here. But still, I feel like, the way I look at narrative still works here, and there are interconnections here. I hope this helps. I hope this helps. This helps you refine your understanding, gets you excited about maybe thinking about how you evolve your practice, how you evolve your company, how you evolve your nonprofit, whether you're a school or a church or a product-based organization, whatever it is. Having a tool like this to explain your vision and creating enthusiasm, excitement, motivation around why people should be more willing to work with you or join you or buy from you is a powerful thing. Someone in my workshop called it a lifelong skill, because it's comprehensive. It's a very integral model. But I continue to believe that there is something there, that there are interactions that we tend to forget, and that if we take a look at them a little more carefully, we might be able to create better companies.